thank you all for coming. And I also want to thank Ann Carmichael from Layla for doing this for us. And I hope that you'll all learn something from, I'm sure that I will, because I usually do. And so I'm just going to turn it over to, all right.
All right. Thank you so much, Ms. Grubb, for having me this evening. I am Ann Carmichael, and I'm a student financial aid consultant with Leela. And my goal is to make sure that you have the resources and support that you need to complete your FAFSA. And then I hope you're going to have a better understanding of the student financial aid process once we're finished. Now, I don't know what your school's position is, but the Louisiana Department of Education has asked that the class of 2021, the public schools, that is, complete the FAFSA as a graduation requirement. Now, the purpose of this is just to ensure that students do complete and that their money is ready and waiting for them when they graduate and they begin their college career. Now, we all know that college can be expensive, so it is time to start thinking about and preparing for those costs, which are going to include equipment, books and supplies, like your textbooks, a computer if you need one, your personal expenses, like your phone bill, laundry if you're living on campus, fuel for your car to get back and forth to school, your room and board, which could include your dorm room or an apartment if you're living off campus, and your tuition and fees. And I'm sure, as you've already found out, as you're doing research on the colleges that you're interested in, oftentimes tuition is listed, but the other expenses and fees are not. And some fees that can really add up are your parking, library, technology, athletic fees. And we just want to make sure that you are doing your research and finding out what that entire cost of attendance is on that campus. But the good news is that financial aid is available from the U.S. Department of Education, the state of Louisiana in the form of the TOPS scholarship, your college or career school, and then nonprofit and private organizations. Every year, the federal government provides more than $120 billion in student financial aid. And we just want to make sure that you are receiving your portion. Now, federal student aid does include the federal Pell Grant, the federal Supplemental Education Opportunity Grant, the Teacher Educational Assistance for College and Higher Education Grant, the Iraq and Afghanistan Service Grant, federal work study, and direct subsidized, unsubsidized, and plus loans. Now, the federal student aid grants are a form of financial aid that does not have to be repaid. So if you are offered a federal student aid grant, don't turn it down. That's your free money. Those grants include the Pell Grant, which is specifically for undergraduates with financial need, FSEOGs for undergraduates with exceptional financial need, service grants for students of military parents who died defending the country following 9/11, and then teach grants for students pursuing a teaching career. Now, the federal work study program provides part-time jobs to help you pay for your education expenses. So by telling the financial aid office that you're interested in federal work study, they will consider you for the program and begin to identify jobs that you might be eligible to apply for. Now, any earnings you make through a federal work study program will be paid directly to you, the student, and should be used to pay for your college expenses. And I'll just let you know that a federal work study job looks great on your first professional resume. So please consider that program as well. Now let's talk just a minute about student loans. And nobody wants to have to take out student loans, but if you must to complete your college degree, then they are a good investment. But there are several types that you need to be aware of. The direct subsidized loans are based on financial need, and no interest is charged until you graduate or cease to attend. On the other hand, unsubsidized loans are available for everyone, regardless of your financial need. But it's important to note that interest does begin to accrue on these loans once they're fully dispersed, which is usually in the spring semester. So you can see that there is a big difference between direct subsidized and unsubsidized loans, and you always want to accept the subsidized portion first. And when you start to receive your financial aid offers, you can remind yourself by telling yourself that the U in unsubsidized means that you always pay the interest on that loan. Now, if you are offered loans and you do need them to complete your academic year, accept the federal student loans first because payments aren't due until you graduate or cease to attend. The interest rate is fixed at a lower rate and no credit check is required. This type of loan is in the student's name only. On the other hand, private loans should be considered very cautiously because most require payments be made while you're still in school. The interest rate is often much higher, and they almost always require a cosigner, which means that you're going to a parent or another adult and asking them to become part of your loan and repay it if you can't do so. But to dispel the myth, almost everyone is eligible for some type of federal student aid. And all federal student aid and most institutional and private aid is contingent upon completion of the free application for federal student aid, or the FAFSA. Now, it launched on October 1st, and it does so every year on October 1. And remember that you do have to submit a FAFSA every year that you're going to be in college. It's also important to note that the student financial aid is awarded on a first come, first served basis. So you want to make sure you're submitting your FAFSA as soon as possible because over 1 million FAFSAs have already been submitted for next academic year. And you want to get to the head of that line while the money is still available, so you will be offered the maximum amount that you're eligible to receive. Now, it's important to pay close attention to the FAFSA deadlines that are going to be set out for your colleges. They will have a priority financial aid deadline. There is a financial aid deadline, a FAFSA deadline for the TOPS scholarship. And yes, the FAFSA can serve as your TOPS application if you meet all the other requirements. And then there's a federal student aid deadline as well. You will want to begin the FAFSA process by collecting all of the documents that you will need to complete the form. And these include the student and parents' Social Security cards, the student and parents' 2019 federal income tax returns, if you filed one, your W-2s, because there's information on this form that might not be found on the federal tax return, and then bank statements and records of investments, because you're going to be asked to report those balances as of the date you submit your FAFSA. Now, begin the process by creating the Federal Student Aid ID, or the FSA ID, because this allows students and parents to identify themselves electronically when accessing all federal student aid websites, but specifically the FAFSA. Now, the FSA ID is going to consist of a username and a password that you yourself will create using your own personal information. Each student and one of his or her parents must create an ID, and here's the web address. It's fsaid.ed.gov. Now, please only use your own personal email address when creating your ID. Students, if you haven't already created an email address, please do not use your school address. Go ahead and get that personal email address created, because once you graduate, you may no longer have access to your school account, and federal student aid will have no way of getting in touch with you. Please don't share information. Students, don't use your parents' mobile number as your alternate number, because that's considered shared information. You're going to have trouble signing your FAFSA if you do so. Now, your FSA ID is your official electronic signature for federal student aid documents, and it's legally binding. So make sure that you're recording it, because you're going to need it every year that you submit a FAFSA, and that you're keeping it in a safe place. Now, if you don't have access to a computer when you're ready to get started on the FAFSA, you can always download the FAFSA mobile app, and it's called My Student Aid, and you can use it to submit your FAFSA on your mobile phone or any other mobile device that has internet access. Or if you prefer, you can complete on the web-based version at fafsa.gov. Now, it's important to note that if the student wants to begin work in the student section on the mobile app and parents want to use the web-based version, that's fine. When it's time to sign and submit, everything will be integrated into one application. You'll want to begin the FAFSA by logging in with the student's FSA ID, because the FAFSA is the student's application for federal student aid. The parent FSA ID is going to be used later in the form if you choose to transfer your tax information from the IRS into the FAFSA, and then again to sign the student's FAFSA. The high school class of 2021 should be completing the 2021-2022 FAFSA, because that is the academic year that you are applying for financial aid. Now, if you're graduating early and starting college this academic year, you will need to complete both FAFSAs. Once you're in this FAFSA itself, you can see that there are 8 sections that need to be completed before submitting. And those include the student demographics, where the student will be asked to report his social security number, name, date of birth, personal email address, home address, residency status, and gender. The school selection section, where the student will be asked to list his high school, any colleges that he would like his FAFSA data to be shared with, and housing plans on each of those campuses. Then the dependency status section, where the student will be asked to consider a list of 10 questions to determine whether she's an independent or dependent student in the eyes of federal student aid. And then she must report the number of dependents living in her household. Now, parents' education level is also asked for, and oftentimes parents want to know why they're being asked to report their level of education, but it's important to note that there could be additional grant monies available for first-generation college students. Next, you'll move into the parent demographic section, where parents will report their social security numbers, their marital status, and email addresses. And then you move on into the parent and student financials, where you will each report your working wages from 2019, any federal benefits you receive, and balances of savings and investment accounts. And then it's time to sign and submit the FAFSA. And once you do so, you will receive confirmation. Now, as you move through the FAFSA, should you need clarification, simply click on the question mark over to the right-hand side for a more detailed description of that question. There are hyperlinks provided that you can use for more information. You can request an online FAFSA chat, call Federal Student Aid, or contact us at LELA's FAFSA helpline. But for this session, I'm going to cover only the most commonly asked FAFSA questions. Now, if you have one that I don't cover this evening, please use the Zoom chat box and drop your question in there. And after the presentation is completed, I will check those and answer them. Or if you prefer, I'm also going to leave my contact information for you, and you can email me or call me directly. Now, students must be eligible citizens, must be citizens or eligible non-citizens to complete a FAFSA. If you find yourself in this situation and your parents say do not meet this criteria, you can go ahead and submit, but you will use all zeros anywhere a parent's social security number is asked for. Now, young men between the ages of 18 and 26 must register with Selective Service, and if they haven't already done so, they can do that within the FAFSA itself. Only the colleges that you're listing in your FAFSA in that school selection section are going to consider you for student financial aid. So add all of the schools that you're considering. Even if you haven't completed your admissions application at each of those schools, go ahead and send them your FAFSA data. And you can add up to 10 colleges at a time. Now, if you're applying to more than 10 colleges, there are instructions within this section to help you through that process. And to determine your dependency status, you are going to be asked to consider these 10 questions. And remember, they're asking these questions of the student. And the purpose is to determine whether a student is dependent upon his parents or independent of them. Will you be 24 or older by January 1st of the year for which you're applying for financial aid? Are you married or separated but not divorced? Will you be working on a graduate degree? Do you have children who receive more than half of their support from you? Do you have dependents other than children or a spouse who live with you and receive more than half of their support from you? Are you currently serving on active duty in the U.S. Armed Forces for purposes other than training? Are you a veteran of the U.S. Armed Forces? At any time since you turned 13, were both of your parents deceased? Were you in foster care? Or were you a ward or a dependent of the court? Are you an emancipated minor? Or are you in legal guardianship as determined by a court? And it's important to note here, legal custody is not always considered legal guardianship. So make sure you have your documentation with you when you answer that question. And then the last one is, are you an unaccompanied youth who is homeless, or are you self-supporting and at risk of being homeless? Now, if you can answer yes to just one of these questions and provide a legal document supporting your claim, then you're considered an independent student for FAFSA purposes, and you will not be required to provide parental information. Even if you live alone and say pay your and file your own taxes, you are still considered a dependent student unless you can answer one of the 10 questions. Now, the number one question that we're asked is, which parents do I report on my FAFSA? And the rule of thumb is that the parent or parents that you've lived with the longest in the 12 months prior to the date you submit your FAFSA should be listed. So if you live with both of your biological parents, then that's easy. You just list both of them. But if the parent that you lived with the longest in the past 12 months is either separated, divorced, or was never married, then you should list only that biological parent on your FAFSA. However, if that parent is now remarried, you must also include his or her spouse. In other words, federal student aid wants to know the financial standing of the household that the student has lived in the longest in the 12 months prior to the date that the FAFSA was submitted. Now, if you're identified as a dependent student, but your parents refuse to provide their information on your FAFSA, you can submit by stating, I'm unable to provide information about my parents, but you must contact the financial aid office to talk to them about your situation. Because if you do not, you'll only be offered federal student loans. And we want to make sure that everyone is considered for the free monies to help you finish your college career. So don't be shy about this. They're there to help you and they will work through this situation with you. Now, to make the processing of your federal student aid go a lot smoother, we encourage you to use the Internal Revenue Services data retrieval tool. It's easy to use. Just grab your 2019 income tax return. You'll be taken directly into the IRS website and use that return to fill in all of these fields with the information exactly as printed on the return. Now, we've had situations where perhaps a tax preparer misspelled the taxpayer's name. You have to misspell it. Or if you've moved since 2019's filing, use the address printed on the form. Even if the preparer used street instead of avenue, you do have to make sure it matches exactly what was filed, because the IRS wants to make sure that the person in their site is the person who submitted that return. Now, using this tool is not only going to make sure your information is accurate, it's a lot quicker. Instead of manually going line by line, entering your information into the FAFSA, it's also going to greatly diminish the student's chances of being selected for verification. Now, almost every college with every student who has not used the IRS data retrieval tool will be asked to go to the IRS site, request an official tax transcript, and then you will have to send it to every college that you're considering. So this just makes things go a lot smoother. And if you're having trouble using the tool because it is very sensitive, please call Federal Student Aid or call us on Leela's FAFSA helpline. We have some experience with this. And then you're almost finished with the FAFSA. But before submitting, please review the student aid report, which reflects every question that you were asked and your answer to each one. So by reviewing the report, you're going to ensure that you can go back and make corrections so that the financial aid offices receive the most accurate information and they can timely process the student's financial aid. Then you're in the sign and submit section where the student and one of his parents will use their FSA IDs to electronically sign the FAFSA. And then you'll press submit. And once you do, you will automatically see a pop-up, which is the student's FAFSA confirmation page. Now, although federal student aid will send an email to the student telling them that they have successfully submitted their FAFSA, this is the only time you're going to get this much information. You'll receive a confirmation number showing the date and time that the FAFSA was submitted. And we actually have had students who said, LSU said they didn't get my FAFSA transmission. And they just inform them to go grab their confirmation page, let LSU know what that number is to prove that they actually did submit it and when. You'll see a data release number, and that number can be given back to any college listed on your FAFSA if you want them to make corrections on your behalf. You'll see all the steps needed to complete the student financial aid process. You can view the schools that you've listed that you want your FAFSA data to be sent to, and you'll see your financial aid estimates. And I want to stress the word estimate because everyone's excited when they see the dollar amounts. But this is just a recommendation that's going to be sent over to the financial aid offices, and they will be awarding your aid, not federal student aid. Now, if you begin the FAFSA but you don't complete it, you have 45 days to do so. You might be surprised on that 46th day when you log in and everything's been wiped clean and you're starting over again. But don't worry, federal student aid will continue to remind the student that the FAFSA still needs to be submitted. Now, say that you submitted your FAFSA, but you want to add a school, or you want to change your contact information, or say the college has asked you to make some corrections. There are several ways to do that, but the easiest is to go back to FAFSA.gov, log in with the student's FSA ID, make those changes, but remember each time you do that, you must sign and submit the FAFSA again. Now, once the FAFSA is fully processed, which usually takes about 3 to 5 days, it's then shared with the colleges listed. And each financial aid office will begin to identify any aid that you might be eligible to receive. If your family's financial situation has changed since you filed to return in 2019, and we know that we're going to see this all over the country, but especially in Louisiana with all of the hurricanes that have blown through our state, your financial aid offices will take this into consideration. So please contact them. If you've had a reduction in work hours or someone's been laid off in your family, or you've had some unexpected medical expenses, anything that has reduced your income since 2019 can be reported to the financial aid office because they might be able to identify some additional grant money to help you finish out your academic year. Because they are working on your net price, and they're going to do this by taking their cost of attendance and subtracting any grants or scholarships that you're eligible for. And they'll subtract that from the cost of attendance. And this net price is what you will be responsible for paying, whether it's out of pocket or whether you accept student loans to pay that balance. Now, each college will offer you a financial aid package. So make sure that you're checking on these. Some will come in the mail, some will be sent to your email address. But each one will line item their cost of attendance, any scholarships, grants, work study, student loans that they have to offer you. And make sure you're reading your offers carefully and responding to any requests for information that they might ask of you so that they can quickly process your offer. Now, once you do complete your FAFSA and you do decide which college you're going to attend, you want to accept your aid in this order. Grants and scholarships first, because this is gift aid that does not have to be repaid. Federal work study next, because you've earned that money and you don't have to pay it back. And then student loans, because that is borrowed money that has to be repaid with interest. Now, I know this is a lot of information, and I know that You may have additional questions. So Leela has published again this year a FAFSA completion guide and workbook, and it's free for all Louisiana high school seniors. So if you haven't already received your copy, please feel free to shoot me an email, and I will also include our senior checklist to help you stay on track and be ready for college in the fall. And I don't want to skip the opportunity to talk to you about scholarships for just a minute. And I know that your college counselor has told you about quite a few. And there are thousands of them, literally. You'll find them on your college's websites. You will may be able to find some through your parents' employers. Private nonprofit organizations offer them. Community groups and religious groups have scholarships that they offer. Some are merit-based. They're awarded on your academic achievement or some special talent that you might have, and others are based on financial need. Scholarship could cover the entire amount of your tuition, or it could be a one-time offer. But either way, applying for and winning these scholarships is going to reduce the cost of your education, and bottom line, it's going to reduce your student loan debt. So talk to Mrs. Grubb about scholarships that she's heard about. Contact your college's financial aid offices and your admissions recruiters to find out what they know. And this year, Leela is offering a $1,000 FAFSA completion scholarship for seniors attending a Louisiana high school. We also offer a $1,000 Choose Louisiana scholarship for students who are attending a college in Louisiana. You can find out the details and grab those applications from our website at leela.org. Now, for students who are attending pricier colleges and you've exhausted all your opportunities for grants, scholarship, and your federal and state dollars, Leela does administer a nonprofit education loan program to help you meet those expenses. And you can find out more about it at leelachoice.org. Now I want to be able to entertain your questions. So if you have any and you want to drop them in that chat box, I'm going to check it in just a second. But I do want to provide you with our FAFSA helpline number. It's printed here, and my personal or business email. I feel like it's my personal account because I'm on it all day. But feel free to contact me individually after our session tonight. All right, I do have a question. But it's a private chat, so I'm gonna answer that privately. So if anybody else has something that they want to ask. Okay, now, here's a question. Would you mind briefly going over verification? Verification gets a bad name as far as student financial aid goes, and it can be a very tedious process. That's why it is just so important to make sure that you are providing the most accurate information when you're completing the FAFSA and that you're not making any errors. Now, the most common type of verification is the verification of the income information. Every college has its own verification process. Sometimes you'll find that perhaps your verification of the number in your household is overlooked by one college, but another college might ask you to provide proof that you actually do have that number of people living in your household. They might ask you for your marriage certificate to prove that you're married, or your divorce documentation to show that you're divorced. But it's important to understand that the financial aid offices are administering federal dollars. So, in order to cover themselves legally, they must ask for specific documentation to verify that the information printed on the FAFSA is actually your situation. So, if you have a specific verification question, I'm happy to answer it, but I will say that there's not a general format that is used, but every college financial aid office is going to handle it differently. Now, we've had students who perhaps had a child that they support. One college might question that. They might ask for receipts to show that that student actually did support the child, bought formula, bought diapers, etc., provided living expenses for that child, and other colleges will not. So it's really going to depend on the college that you're attending. Okay, what about households that are split? Who would be the parent for FAFSA purposes? And that's a good question. The student is going to report the parent that he has lived with the longest in the past 12 months. So if mom and dad are separated or divorced or were never married, the student is going to identify the parent that he lived with the longest. Now we have parents that say, well, we have joint custody and she lives exactly the same amount of days with me as she did with dad. But I'll tell you, some financial aid offices are going to say, well, did she live with you 1 hour more than she lived with dad? Or who provided the most financial support? Who paid for tuition? Who bought her, her wardrobe? Things like that. They can get sort of picky about it, but that's depending upon which school you're applying for or to. Can anyone else think of anything? Has anybody already started their FAFSA and put it on hold because they weren't quite sure how to answer a question? If you do find yourself in that situation, don't hesitate to reach out. There's plenty of help. I know that your counselor, college counselor, is there to help you. And we're there to help you. Federal Student Aid has some great reps that'll stay on the line with you as you complete. I see somebody's reporting they've already completed it. Here's another question. Is applying for TOPS a separate process from completing the FAFSA? And I'll say it this way. The FAFSA can serve as the TOPS application. So if you live in the state of Louisiana and you submit your FAFSA, Federal Student Aid has an agreement with the TOPS office that every FAFSA they receive, they report back to the TOPS office. And then the TOPS office will make sure that all your other requirements are being met. They'll grab your FAFSA and they will automatically award that student their scholarship. But that is if you're meeting all the other requirements. Okay, another verification question. Where do the students find the request for verification? And that's a great question. Some schools will send a letter, a printed letter with a form for the students to fill out, and they will tick mark which topics need to be verified, and the student can manually enter that information. I've seen that at some universities. Some colleges will communicate with the student on their student account. So once you've applied for a college and you create your student account so that the school can begin to communicate with you about any documents you need to provide for admissions. Well, the financial aid office will also communicate with the student through that account. And they might send an electronic form of verification where the students will click on a link and provide upload documents or provide written documentation of their situation. So, like I mentioned before, the financial aid offices have total control over the student financial aid that they award. So there's going to be a little bit different process, at each college you're applying to. But also going back to that TOPS question, if you choose not to submit a FAFSA, you can go to the TOPS website and complete a TOPS application. So that is another form of the TOPS application. How do you appeal a financial aid package? There are private companies that say that you can pay them to find more financial aid for your child. But I'll tell you that I've been in financial aid for over 20 years, and I've not really ever heard of much of an adjustment that those private companies can get for you. They can give you some advice on what to do. They can, steer you in the right direction. But bottom line is that financial aid office is going to do the best they can legally, because their hands are tied as far as offering somebody additional money. They have to work within their federal regulations. Now, if you really feel like you could be eligible for additional money, that financial aid counselor that you're assigned to is going to be your best friend. And, financial aid uses, and the colleges use this financial aid as a recruitment tool. So they really are trying their best to give you all the money they can because they want you to go to their college. So I'll let you kind of take it from there. But bottom line is that financial aid counselor is going to be awarding your aid, and, really is your best friend. So I'd be careful about dealing with them in a negative way, if I can say it that way. How long does it take to complete a FAFSA? I have had students who I've been on the phone with from start to finish who completed the FAFSA in 20 minutes. But that's with the parent on a phone creating their ID, the student at the computer creating their FSA ID, and then switching back and forth seats, to go through each section. And those are people that have all of their documents with them. So that's why I always encourage you to gather everything up. Because if you're starting and stopping and going and grabbing another document, or you've made a mistake on applying for your FSA ID and you put in the wrong email address, it can be dragged out. But I've seen people finish it within about 20 minutes, but I would say 30 to 40 minutes is pretty typical. Anybody else think of anything? Oh, how important is it to use your formal name? Well, I'll tell you this. You have to, when you're applying for your FSA ID, you're going to be asked to use the name exactly as it's printed on your most recent Social Security card. Because I've had people, moms for instance, who created their FSA ID, but they've used their married name, but they never changed their name with Social Security, so they can't get a match. They can't finish their FSA ID because they haven't used the name printed on that social security card. And some of them are like, that was 20 years ago. I didn't even think, I mean, I thought I changed my name at Social Security. But when you create your FSA ID, that information is verified with the Social Security Administration. So it's very important that you use the name that's printed on your card. And another thing we've seen problems with, parents use their formal names on their financial aid application, but then on their admissions application, they might use an abbreviation or their nickname. And then it can't be matched up on the college level. Their financial aid can't be processed because the admissions application has a different name on it. So, yeah, make sure that you're using your formal name on all of these documents. And these are great questions. And these are questions that, feel free to call and ask, because that's what we're here for. Okay, Mrs. Grubb, if you want to end okay, I have one more. So should we use account statements to fill out the financial section so we can submit for verification if needed? That's why we encourage you to use that IRS data retrieval tool, because the financial aid office is not going to have to verify that. So your tax information is verified. We ask you to get a copy of, and what I usually do is just do a screenshot of my account balances as of the date I'm going to submit the FAFSA, and just put that in in a folder with all the other application, admissions, and financial aid information, and keep it. I have never heard of a financial aid office saying, okay, I want to see proof that as of October 31st, 2021, you actually had this much money in your account. But they could. So it is important to, do your best as you're going through the process. Use the data retrieval tool that assures that's verified. Get your bank statements, do screenshots so that those balances are reported and you have proof that that was the actual amount in your accounts, just in case you're asked to verify that. Schools can be as particular as they want to, but it's usually only perhaps they've been audited in the past and that was a finding. With their audit, they're not really doing it to inconvenience you, but they are so legally bound to report every single dollar, justify every single dollar that they give away, that that's why they're being particular. And these people get audited by the federal government, by the Department of Education, by the TOPS office. The financial aid offices get verified probably 5 or 6, get audited probably 5 or 6 times a year. So that's why they have to be particular as well. Do students have to put in their tax information if they filed taxes back in 2019 with a part-time job? And yes, they do. If they filed a return in 2019, they can also and should also use the IRS data retrieval tool to report their tax information. Now, if a student earned money in 2019 and received W-2s, but they didn't earn enough to file a return, that's why you need to have your W-2s in front of you. Because yes, that student will be asked to grab his W-2s from 2019 and report the amount they earned, even if they didn't file a return. And I mean, colleges will ask for that. Some parents say, well, we only worked for 2 weeks at the end of the year, and I think it was about $300. And you can estimate and then find your W-2s and then go back and amend your FAFSA. But it's just best to have all of that in front of you, do it at one time. After submitting the FAFSA, how long should I wait to expect to hear back from, I'm assuming, the colleges? Um, every college has its own timeline. When they started this prior year tax information, we really thought that the financial aid offices were going to start awarding earlier. Some do and some don't, and they all have their own timelines. So you might submit your FAFSA on October 1st and be first in line, but you might not receive your offer until the spring. But the good part about filing first is they're going to grab those FAFSAs that were submitted on October 1st, and those students are going to get their money held for them. So although they might not tell you how much it is, they are going to be first in line to have their aid processed. A lot of them are still processing aid from, say it's the fall semester. They're still dealing with the summer semester. They're still trying to deal with those students who, have balances, and they're trying to figure out, if they have to return funds. So they're always pretty busy. What if my school asks for a CSS profile? Now the CSS profile, although I have helped a few students with it, it's a much more detailed form. And you're really going to be asked more specific information about yourself and about your income information. Some schools want both the FAFSA and the CSS profile. That can be tedious. And I guess you do have to go ahead and complete it, because some of them will not process you for student financial aid until you do complete that CSS profile. Anyone else? Well, it was a pleasure to be with you this evening, and best of luck to everyone. And I look forward to receiving your FAFSA completion scholarship applications too. Mrs. Grubb, do you want to address them one last time?
I just want to say thank you to those of you who did attend, and I hope that you found it beneficial and got answers to some of your questions. And do know that if you have other questions, we certainly will do our best to help. But again, Anne and the colleges themselves are really the best place to go for the best answers. But we do have some information if we can help with some general questions, I guess you'd say. But thank you all so much. And thank you, Anne.
You're very welcome. And good night.
Good night.